At the start of 2024, there was a lot of excitement about the Indian economy. We were one of the fastest growing economies, and there was a lot of anticipation that we'll become a $4 trillion economy by FY 2024 2025. There was also an anticipation that we'll become the third largest economy by the year 2027. India was supposed to chug along at a beautiful economic growth rate of 7%. But the latest data from the National Statistic Office, or the NSO, is rather worrisome. The real GDP growth is at 5.4% in the second quarter of this financial year, the lowest in 7 quarters. That's nearly 2 years. The gross value added growth slowed down to 5.8%. This growth is rather underwhelming, mainly because the RBI and other government agencies predicted the growth rate will be much higher. The Reserve Bank of India projected that the Indian GDP will grow by 7%. In its meet in December, the MPC has downgraded the growth forecast for 2024-2025 to 6.6% from the earlier 7.2%. Barring the agriculture and service sectors, all segments of the economy reported a sharp deceleration from a year ago in quarter 2. To add to this, India's exports also fell in November to a 25-month low of $32.11 billion. The import bill jumped 27% to an all-time high of almost $70 billion. So, is the Indian economy really slowing down, or is it just a one-off number like our CEA puts it? I spoke to Rajani Sinha, Chief Economics at CAD Ratings, to find out more. The first question I asked her is the big one. Is the Indian economy really slowing down?
I would say if you look specifically at the slowdown that we saw in the second quarter, that was because of some specific reasons like a sharp slowdown or, in fact, contraction in center as well as state capex. And there was also poor performance by industrial sectors, specifically mining, because of prolonged monsoon. And some of these aspects are likely to improve going forward in the second half of the year. So we feel that the slowdown that we saw in the second quarter of the fiscal year, that is the bottom, and from here we are likely to see the growth picking up. But even with the pickup, what we are expecting is that the state and center that could not spend in the first half of the year because of a lot of election related restrictions and uncertainties are likely to pick up their capex in the second half of the year, and that will support a pickup in growth. So, just to set the context, like the center has spent only around 42% of its budget capex in the first 7 months of the fiscal year. So, now going forward in the next few months, we are expecting center's capex to pick up and even the state capex to pick up. So, in that sense, that should be supportive of growth. But still, overall, we are expecting the GDP growth for FY25 at 6.5%. And for FY26, we are expecting GDP growth at 6.7%. So you can see that from the 7 to 8% growth that we have seen in the previous few years, now we are expecting growth to moderate to around 6.5 to 6.7% or so. But I would say, yes, while the growth is moderating, it would still be relatively better than what we are seeing all around us in terms of global volatility and uncertainty.
The government is usually a big spender, and a lot of that money goes into fueling the economy. But because of the elections and other reasons, the government couldn't invest as much as it normally does. So private investment has to pick up. How is it shaping up?
Private investment has been relatively muted. And, last few quarters, we have been expecting that private capex will pick up, because if you see, actually, the ground is all set for private capex to pick up, in the sense that, if you look at corporate balance sheet, deleveraging has already happened. If you look at banks balance sheet, they are in a position to give out loans. So in that sense, the balance sheets are clean of corporates and banks, and they so in that sense we were expecting investment to pick up, private investment. But so far private capex has been slow. In fact, for FY24, we had done this analysis of capex by some sample 1,000 companies, and we saw that overall capex, these are non-financial companies, and we found that the capex was almost like flat compared to FY23. So, so far, yes, private capex is muted, But if I look at some of the lead indicators, which gives an indication of what to expect on private capex going forward, we are expecting an improvement in the sense that if you look at the order book of the capital goods companies, they are showing a very strong growth this year. If you look at the power sector companies, they have strong capex plan. Even for the road sector, if you look at their order book, which had actually contracted in the previous fiscal year, in this year we are already seeing some pickup in the healthy pickup in their order book. So these are some lead indicators which are showing that private capex should pick up. And given that we are also expecting some cut by RBI in the policy interest rate in the first quarter of next calendar year, private capex should show a pickup going forward. But the important thing for that will also be a pickup in sustainable pickup in consumption demand, and especially domestic demand, because see, global demand is weak and is likely to remain weak going forward also, because the global uncertainties are here to stay. But if there is a sustainable pickup in domestic demand, that will give the confidence and comfort to the private sector to go ahead with their capex plan.
Private investments in the economy has been rather low, and many suggest that this is because the interest rates are rather high. Can we attribute the lower growth to the RBI not cutting rates?
So I would say, while interest rate is an important factor, it's not the only important factor. There are many other factors that have a strong bearing on the private investment cycle. When a private sector is looking at investment, while interest rate would definitely be an important factor, but they will look at whole lot of other factors in terms of, the most important would be what kind of demand do they see going forward. Only if they see a sustainable strong demand would they go in for capex. Second, what kind of policy certainty do they have? Because in case there are a lot of uncertainties on the policy front, if they are very unsure about the global and domestic macro environment, the private sector would be hesitant to go ahead with the capex.
Another factor that influences growth is consumption. But again, it's a mixed bag. Government's own data shows that private final consumption has increased by 6%. But even FMCG players are reporting a slowdown in their sales. How can we reconcile these two facts?
So if you look at the higher income category, they have not been impacted by a lot of factors which are impacting the lower income category, be it high inflation, be it the poor job scenario, or the very muted growth in real wages. These factors are not very significantly impacting the higher income category, and they have been spending. If you look at the high price point items, be it auto or be it real estate, what we have been seeing is that the luxury or high price category have been showing strong growth. Whereas the lower price point, the entry level car, or for that item, anything else which is lower price, there we are still seeing muted spending. So basically, the lower income category or the middle income category is still not very confident about their sustaining their income, and they are being very cautious in spending. And then now, when you look at something like FMCG, a large chunk of the lower income and middle income categories, a large part of their wallet share goes to FMCG items. Whereas for the higher income category, the part of their wallet which goes into spending on FMCG items is relatively less. So probably that would explain that FMCG companies are feeling the pinch of lower consumption more than what we are seeing in overall GDP growth. But having said that, I would also like to highlight the interesting aspect that after many quarters now we are seeing that rural demand has started picking up. So if we look at Nielsen data, which shows what kind of FMCG volume growth is happening from rural and urban area, we are seeing that for rural area the growth has picked up to around 6% or so in the last 2 quarters, whereas for urban it has slowed to around 2% from around 10% growth that we were seeing last year.
Some experts say that wages have not increased and therefore People are not able to afford what they want to buy. What's your take on this?
So I would say it's a combination of things. For rural specifically, what has happened is that agri's performance has been good. If you see, Kharif harvest has been good this year. If we see rabi sowing also has been good. So overall agri production this year is likely to be good, and we are already seeing the impact of that in terms of rural consumption. But what has been adversely impacting consumption, if you see overall, not just for urban or rural area, it is the high inflation situation. And inflation also, overall, if we see, inflation, the last data point that came was around 5.5%. But if you look at items of daily consumption, and items which are specifically very important, or a large chunk of wallet share of the lower income category goes into lower or middle income category, are items like cereals and vegetable, and there the inflation is high. So for vegetable prices, the inflation this year has been as high as 25%. I'm talking about average that we have seen this year, and some months it has gone as high as more than 40%. So again, cereal inflation, it's high at around 8 to 9%. So is the case with pulses inflation, and these are items of daily consumption. So this is something which is impacting real wages. So this is one aspect, high inflation, specifically food inflation. The other aspect is also what is happening in terms of the employment scenario, employment situation. uh, we saw that, beginning of the year, we saw that IT sector, which is like, major hiring engine for the economy, went very slow with hiring. And we saw a lot of colleges talking about campus hiring being pretty weak this year. So, these are factors which would have a strong bearing on consumer sentiments and spending. So, this is also something which has been impacting consumption spending. And given that, there's a lot of automation and digitalization that has been happening, we have to be prepared for this threat in the economy in terms of job creation, which is there. And the critical thing will be as to how do we handle this going forward, because something like automation is here to stay. So we'll have to figure out as to how do we benefit out of it, instead of it just eating into the jobs in the economy. And also in terms of what's happening to consumers sentiments, because if in terms of real wages, with inflation at around, overall inflation at around 5% or so, if the wage growth is not taking care of that, and real wage growth is like very flat, it does impact consumer sentiments also, and that has a bearing on consumer spending. So I would say it's a combination of these factors that have contributed to a relatively muted consumption growth. But at the same time, while these are the factors which impacted, which has impacted broadly lower and middle income category, we saw that the upper income category they are relatively less impacted by factors like wage growth or inflation. So we saw that there the spending was relatively better.
Some of the problems that you mentioned, the fact that food inflation is high, that wages aren't rising, there's a poor employment situation in the country, these are all long term issues. So many of these solutions are long term solutions. What can the government do now?
There are some problems which can be which are likely to be taken care of in 2025, in the sense that inflation is likely to moderate going forward. If we go ahead with the assumption of normal monsoon this next year, given that this year monsoon was good, and I spoke about agri production, the estimate is showing healthy growth. So food inflation should moderate going forward. But having said that, we need to remain cautious on food inflation front, because there are a lot of climate changes happening, and it's difficult to predict, or it's difficult to say what to expect on food prices. But broadly, if we go with the assumption of a normal monsoon, there should be a moderation in food inflation going forward. In fact, we are expecting that moderation to start happening from the first quarter of next year. So that should provide some reprieve. Like I said, consumption, with agri production already being good, we are seeing rural consumption picking up. And that is likely to gather further steam going forward. As I said, private investment also, we are seeing some signs of pickup. So, there are some small signs of things likely to pick up in 2025. But yes, when I talk about longer term issues, like in terms of job creation, or many other structural factors that are impacting the economy, that is something which is definitely going to take time. But I would say for Indian economy, while these structural factors, they would take time to play out in terms of what kind of reforms the government introduces in those areas. But otherwise, there are some other factors which are likely to turn a little better going forward compared to the what we saw in the second quarter in terms of the GDP data. Hence, growth is likely to relatively improve going forward.
What can the government do to give a boost to the economy given that the budget is just a month away?
If you look at the growth that the economy has recorded post pandemic, it has been led mainly by government capex. I feel now there is also a need to give some kind of a boost to consumption, because India is a consumption driven economy. More than 60% of the, around 60% of the GDP is coming from consumption. So, a boost to consumption in the form of say if the budget, if in the union budget there is some cut in personal income tax, say by around 5 percentage, the overall personal income tax liability, that would provide the much needed reprieve to consumers, because as I we discussed earlier, the real wages have not grown in the last few years. And in terms of government finances, that would definitely have an impact. In terms of revenue loss for the government, it would amount to something like 0.2% of the GDP. But I feel that right now, given that growth is showing some signs of weakness, government can go a little slow in its fiscal consolidation effort. So even while they should continue reducing the fiscal deficit, they can go a little slower and give some boost or stimulus to consumption in the economy. That will go a long way, and it will also help bring up private investment, because I said, as I discussed earlier, one of the factors that can support private investment is if they see sustainable pickup in domestic consumption. So in that sense, that's one thing the government should look at. The other, two things that I want to highlight are more long term in nature. They would not have an immediate impact, but those are factors that would really help India move towards its vision of becoming a developed economy by the 100th year of independence. So, one there I would say is focus on rural economy, because a large 60% of India's population lives in the rural area. Around 45% of India's workforce is in the agri sector. So measures to boost agri productivity and also to give a boost to agri allied sectors, like uh, agri process, food processing, horticulture, livestock, all this will help improve productivity and rural income. Also, schemes that encourage farmer producer organizations, support to them, support to schemes that support improvement in agri productivity. These measures will go a long way in improving rural income. A lot has been been announced in the last budget also for agri sector, but I think the focus on agri or rural areas should continue going forward. The second thing I would say, the second very important thing is that India needs to take this benefit of the global opportunity that has come up in the form of China plus one that everyone is talking about. So here, what I feel is very important is that the government identifies few sectors that have high export potential and that are labor intensive. Say sectors like auto, pharmaceuticals, electronics, textile, leather, and create these industrial clusters. We already have industrial clusters. Further grow those clusters, come up with new clusters with very high quality infrastructure, and create the whole ecosystem around it to attract investment in these sectors, and make sure that these items are completely globally competitive. So in that sense, ease the supply chain as required. If there is a requirement to cut import tariffs to make our exports more competitive, that should be done. Probably have skilling institutes in these industrial clusters, so that the labor is skilled, or customized skilling is done for them, so that they can get directly absorbed in these clusters. So this is a model that has worked very well in East Asian countries. In the last budget also, FM spoke about this. So again, I feel in this budget also, the focus on this should continue.
Thank you for watching the video. If you like the video, please click the like button and also ensure to subscribe to get more videos from The Hindu.